In the late 1930s, a German woman wrote a letter of complaint to Nazi officials. Apparently, that woman's house was rather close to a concentration camp where the soldiers tortured and killed their prisoners virtually 24 hours a day. And so that woman wrote a letter of complaint saying that she didn't like hearing all that screaming and crying all that time, and wanted to know if either they could stop the torturing and the killing, or at least do it somewhere else where she wouldn't have to hear it. For it's like if you've ever gone to visit someone in a hospital or a nursing home. It seems that in virtually every hospital or nursing home you go into, there's at least one person there who's constantly calling out, "Help me, help me, help me." Well, at first, when you hear someone calling out for help, your inclination might very well be to try to figure out something you can do to go in and help that person. But after you hear someone crying out, "Help me, help me, help me," for hours upon hours on end, unless you're Mother Teresa, you don't feel like going in and helping that person. No, you feel like going in and giving them a whack and telling them to be quiet. After a while, you reach a point where you just don't want to hear it anymore. Quite possibly, that's how the disciples felt here in this story that we just heard from the Gospel of Matthew. As the passage begins, we're told that Jesus and the disciples intentionally got on a boat and went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee to get away from it all for a while. But then, as soon as they arrived there on the far shore, immediately there were crowds that were surrounding them, calling out for Jesus and the disciples to help them. And Jesus did. Jesus had compassion for the people and healed those who were sick. But then, as the day was getting near an end, the disciples went up to Jesus and said, "Jesus, it's getting kind of late. So if you don't mind, could you tell these people to beat it, to scram? After all, Jesus, in case you forgot, we came over to this side of the lake to get in a little vacation time, a little rest and relaxation. But ever since we've gotten here, we've heard nothing but a non-stop calling for help and more help. So Jesus, we're kind of tired now, and we'd like to just sit down and relax and eat our dinner in peace. So if you could just send these people away, certainly they'd be able to find a McDonald's or Wendy's where they could get their own dinner." But Jesus responded by saying to them, "No, you give them something to eat." Well, right away, the disciples' eyes bugged out and they sputtered, "Jesus, do you have any idea how many people are here in this crowd? Why, there have to be 4, 5, 6, 7,000 people here, and we have nothing to feed them with. Nothing. All we have are 5 hamburger buns and 2 anchovies. That's nothing." And so Jesus said, 5 pieces of bread and 2 pieces of fish. That's not nothing. Bring them here to me. And Jesus took them and prayed and then handed that food back to the disciples and said, "Now go and do what I told you to do. Go and give these people something to eat." And we're told that when the disciples took what they had and went out and began to feed those people, In the end, not only did they succeed in giving everyone a full meal, but there were also 12 baskets full of leftover pieces. What happened there? Some people try to explain what happened there by saying that, well, when those crowds of people saw that all the disciples had to offer them were 5 pieces of bread and 2 little pieces of fish, that everyone in that crowd was polite and just took a little tiny microscopic molecule from the basket. And so they say that when the Bible tells us that everyone ate and was full, that what it really means was that Jesus spiritually fed the people, but that their stomachs were still hungry. Maybe. But I don't think that's what this story is all about. No, when the story in Matthew says that they all ate and were full, that's what it means, that everyone ate real food and their stomachs were filled. And somehow, we aren't told how, but that as the disciples gave away more and more of their food, the more they seemed to have. It's a little bit like some things that have been happening recently with our church's food pantry. Kathy Schulz, our church secretary, runs the food pantry for us and has told me that in the last month or so, she's had to make 2 rather large purchases of food to replenish some of the shelves. One purchase of about $200 worth of food, and another for about $500 worth of food. But she says that in each of those cases, the very next day, donation checks arrived in the mail equal to or greater than each of those purchases. Or it's like when I first came here as pastor in the year 2000. Back then, we served about 25 to 30 families a month in the food pantry. And as that number began to edge up to about 35 families a month, there were some people who came to me and said, we've got to set a limit. There's no way we can feed more than 35 families a month. We just can't do it. We've got to send those people away to fend for themselves somewhere else. But that's not what we did. And today, our food pantry serves about 90 families a month. And we have more food donations and monetary donations coming in than we have ever had in the past. Like with the disciples, it seems that oftentimes our tendency is to be cautious with what we have. After all, the disciples probably figured if we take the bread and the fish that we brought with us for our dinner and give it away to feed the people here in this crowd, what are we going to have left to eat for our meal? But as the disciples went out and did what Jesus told them to do, as they went out and gave and gave and gave of what they had, they discovered that somehow God provided. Somehow God provided for that crowd and for them. The disciples discovered that as they took a step of faith and started to